Hi everyone. I just finished reading a book here that I thought was quite interesting and timely, and I wanted to do a quick review of it while it was fresh. So here, I hope you can see the book here. Oh, here it is. Title is Tangled Webs, How False Statements Are Undermining America, from Martha Stewart to Bernie Madoff, by James Stewart, who I actually had not heard of before picking up this book, but he's an interesting guy in his own right. So the author of Heart of a Soldier, the best-selling Blind Eye and Bloodsport, and blockbuster Den of Thieves, a former page one editor at the Wall Street Journal who won a Pulitzer Prize in 1988 for his reporting on the stock market crash and insider trading, regular contributor to Smart Money and The New Yorker. Now, I picked up this book actually just for a research project I'm doing right now for a client, but this actually turned out to be a terrific read, and I think it's quite timely in light of the Mueller investigation and so forth. So I wanted to just go over a couple quick points here. So Stewart here, the book, by the way, was written in 2011, which provides interesting context here. But so basically, he opens the book by pointing out that we have pretty good data when it comes to crimes like murder and robbery, burglary, but I found this surprising that actually no one keeps any statistics for perjury and false statements, even though they're felonies punishable by up to 5 years in prison. And he's saying that it's because there's simply too much of it and too little is prosecuted to generate any meaningful data. But he argues, and he's writing here in 2011, that he says, quote, mounting evidence suggests that the broad public commitment to telling the truth under oath has been breaking down, eroding over recent decades, a trend that has been accelerating in recent years. Prosecutors have told me repeatedly that a surge of concerted, deliberate lying by a different class of criminals, sophisticated, educated, affluent, and represented in many cases by the best lawyers, threatens to swamp the legal system and undermine the prosecution of white-collar crime. And then I found this to be quite funny that he quotes here James Comey, who he describes as the former Deputy Attorney General and U.S. Attorney who prosecuted Martha Stewart. So he quotes Comey here. He says, quote, it's nearing a crisis. People think that the government is omnipotent. The truth is, this is an honor system. We count on the fact that witnesses will testify, produce documents and other evidence, and tell the truth. If not the whole truth, is reduced to nothing but perjury and obstruction prosecutions. And so in most of the book, he basically approaches this as a series of case studies. He talks about Martha Stewart, Scooter Libby, Barry Bonds, Bernie Madoff. Let me see if, yeah, those are the case studies. Now, I'm not actually going to get into the specific case studies here, in large part because I have a much more, I think, sympathetic understanding of the Scooter Libby case. And I know him. I know a lot of the people in that case, and I think that one, I'm not ready to say that Libby committed perjury. And I also think that the prosecution of Martha Stewart was overzealous. But where I did find a lot of value, and I thought it was quite interesting, is in the conclusion of the book here, where he ultimately tries to answer the question that got him engaged in this book in the first place, which is, why do these people do it? Why do they lie? Why do they commit false statements? And why do they basically ruined their careers, ruined their lives far more than what would have happened had they simply cooperated and acted lawfully. And so he offers a couple theories here. So the first thing he identified was loyalty, and he says here, to the extent that any of the characters in this book offered any justifications for their lies, the most common was loyalty. They evidently expect to be admired for this behavior. And then he goes on to talk about, this web of loyalty is something not only that the people who are perjuring themselves and committing false statements are doing, but they're really supported by a network and a web of other people, lawyers, aides, a whole bunch of people who basically abet this behavior. And one of the things that he makes note of is that in many cases, these people are perjuring themselves out of a sense of loyalty that turns out to be not at all reciprocated. That so, for example, he talks in the Barry Bonds case, there were people who were perjuring themselves and dealing with fairly harsh sanctions on behalf of these powerful people who they admire. And then when it comes down to it, the powerful people themselves basically throw them under the bus. Okay, and then he goes on to the end and he says, even beyond loyalty, the thing that, he says, okay, why are they doing this? Ultimately, the reason why people at the pinnacle of their careers respected, acclaimed role models like Martha Stewart, Scooter Libby, Barry Bonds, and Bernard Madoff committed the crimes of perjury and false statements seems only too obvious. They thought they could get away with it. And, when I read this, there was a part of me that thought, okay, maybe Stewart isn't digging deep enough. Maybe there's some kind of psychology here. Maybe there's something in their temperament, their personality, their background that might prove to be a common denominator. But then I thought that if we've seen quite a number of different people in different circumstances get involved with perjury and false statements in a pretty wide variety of cases, and if Stewart is correct and his sources are correct that this behavior and crime is actually very common, then I think, as simple as it sounds, he may be onto something, that it's just a combination of loyalty and basically getting away with it. And maybe the scary thing to think about here is that if these people are only really getting caught when they're at the pinnacle of their career, maybe they've actually been doing this their whole lives and have good reasons to believe that they can get away with it. Now, the obvious reason why this book is so timely is because of what we're seeing in the Mueller investigation. And my assumption all along, and the assumption on which I've been making bets in the prediction markets, has been that I'm actually not, or I wasn't totally convinced that there was actually much to this whole Russia collusion thing. No, I'm re-questioning, revisiting that view in light of what we're seeing with the recent news with Michael Cohen, and now we're learning Flynn also is providing fairly substantial evidence. So there actually may be something to the collusion narrative. But I thought that the most likely threat to emerge for President Trump and others in his inner circle may be on this perjury and obstruction issue. And you can totally see if Stewart is correct here that what these ingredients are, the commonalities are, loyalty, a network of people aiding and abetting them in this perjury, and then ultimately a certain sense of a cavalier attitude that they can get away with it. I think all three of these are very much at play here. There's the thing that I think is so interesting and volatile for President Trump and people in his inner circle is that they, on the one hand, they seem to have an expectation of loyalty, and yet too often we've seen that the expectation turns out to be one-sided. And so even though Trump ends up having very high standards of loyalty for the people around him, it seems like he's not always ready to reciprocate that loyalty, and he's not always able to control people in his orbit from ultimately cooperating and allowing things to spin out of control. Now, the second factor, a cast of characters who are ready to aid and abet the loyalty, I think this is basically a given in any presidential administration, where basically the people who work in the White House, who surround themselves by the president, often have a very high opinion of the principal. They get enthralled with the power. I remember actually one of the things that I picked up on when I was working on different memoirs of senior people who have been around the president is that the president is always surrounded by photographers and people just taking pictures of them. And that can create a very, I've come to think that can create a very toxic, narcissistic ecosystem that, it only exacerbates, I think, tendencies or traits of people who aspire to these kinds of positions to begin with. And so I think even if you have a relatively healthy White House culture, and that's not the case here in the Trump administration, you have, I think it's almost a given that you have obsequious behavior, yes men around the president who find that they'll do the president's bidding. And then the third thing here, why do people at the pinnacle of their careers do this? It's only too obvious they thought they could get away with it. And one of the things that is remarkable is that many of the people who he profiles in this book here are very sophisticated people with some of the best lawyers around them, and that does not seem to be the case with Trump. A lot of his legal counsel are either not particularly loyal to him, as we've seen with the cooperation from Don McGahn, or in some cases they're just out of their league. I mean, you look at this sort of battle between Mueller and Rudy Giuliani. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt who has the upper hand here. And you combine the sort of poor legal advice with the fact that Trump has always, not only gotten away with, but I would argue has been rewarded throughout his career for not being precise, for constantly exaggerating, constantly lying. This is a mentality. It's a habit that is not just simply going to go away now that he's under the threat of a federal prosecutor. And, add to that the fact that he doesn't have legal training. He's not someone who appears to read a lot of books or really be engaged with the Constitution or system of government or civil society. And you have here all the ingredients of a very classic, typical perjury or obstruction situation. Now, I think the big question is not whether or not Mueller is going to uncover some evidence of perjury or false statements or obstruction, but the question really is, will the American people care? And if Stewart here is writing in 2011, which is now 7 years ago or something, actually probably even longer when you consider when he actually was doing the research and writing the book. And already he was finding that mounting evidence of public commitment to tell the truth has been breaking down. Already when people are saying that this is endemic in our justice system. I mean, this was before cable news really became the force that it did. It certainly was before a time where social media was a factor. I think political polarization absolutely has gotten worse since then. And judging by how high Trump's approval numbers have continued to be among Republicans, the degree to which identity politics are really just a defining feature of our politics today, it's not obvious to me that even if Mueller ends up publishing a scathing report, really documents perjury, false statements, obstruction, and even if he finds evidence of collusion, it's just not obvious to me that there's going to be a political mandate here for impeachment. So, anyway, I thought this book was very timely, very interesting. Having read it, my hunch is that probably we're going to find, by the end of this Mueller investigation, many examples and instances of false statements and perjury. And I think that probably there will be a trend, maybe a reversal from when Stewart was writing, but I think law enforcement and DOJ probably is going to begin to prosecute perjury and false statements a little bit more aggressively than they have in the past. But at the same time, I think we're now operating here in this new environment, the post-truth environment, as the cliche goes, where we're really going to find out what the American people actually believe about honor, about truth, and the integrity of the justice system, and whether or not these concerns ultimately are more powerful or more pressing than having a legal system and a justice system grounded in integrity.